Global stock markets have advanced handsomely off their extreme lows at the end of last year to the beginning of this year, despite the fact that the world is just emerging from the greatest recession since the Great Depression of 1929. Why do you think this is so?
Well, we could have had another depression. We came pretty close last fall. The credit markets locked up, and alternatives were essentially provided by very, very rapid aggressive responses by central banks. Initially in the United States and Europe and the United Kingdom, Europe being taken care of by the European Central Bank, and then because the credit tightening spread all over the world, it required action by central banks and governments in pretty much the whole developing world. And so, I mean, what's different is that we had more knowledge of what needed to happen in a crisis situation like that, and central banks and to some extent governments had the freedom of action to be able to react very quickly, and make sure that the essential functions of a financial system, which are safe savings channels and providing credit to households and businesses, didn't stop completely. I mean, when you get a depression, it's as if it's the financial equivalent of, without prior warning, announcing that the supermarkets where you buy food will be closed for 9 months. Well, a lot of people will starve if you do that. Well, a lot of companies will starve because of absence of financing if you just shut the markets down. Because many companies go for working capital and refinance themselves on a regular basis. You just can't do that. So we reacted quickly. We had imbalances, asset bubbles, excess leverage, and lots of stuff that are going to are causing a pretty long, deep recession, at least in my judgment. We're kind of in the middle of it. But the extreme risk of extensive sort of collateral damage was avoided, and we sort of pulled out of the free fall part of this at the end of the first quarter of 2009, about 6 or 7 months into the crisis, when people realized that while it wasn't going to be pleasant, it was actually going to be pretty bad. It wasn't going to be a disaster, and not every financial institution was going to go broke, was going to turn out to be insolvent. And that's when the asset market stabilized at lower levels, but bounced back, because we overshot in the downward direction. And we started a long, slow process of recovery.
What's different about the global economic landscape this time around?
In the Great Depression, the central banks made a huge mistake and essentially didn't do what the central banks did in this particular situation, which is to make sure that the credit didn't get cut off completely. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and others have written books on the Great Depression, but there's pretty general agreement that at that time they really didn't understand what was going on. And so they took actions that were actually counterproductive and made it worse rather than better. That's what didn't happen this time.
The Obama-led US government is trying to push for greater regulations on Wall Street to protect from the excesses of the system, which led to the financial crisis last year. Do you think the push for reforms will see the light of day, and why?
I think the answer is yes. I think they will. I have some worries about it. Lots of people are a little bit worried that with the worst of the crisis passing, the momentum for reform has been lost. There's lots of controversy about what form re-regulation should take. And so in the sort of purely political sense, we could get lost in a blizzard of controversy and actually not do anything. But I don't think those are very likely outcomes. I think there's still an understanding that that regulation to increase the probability that the financial system's more stable in the future in the advanced countries. In developing countries, actually avoided many of the problems. They didn't hold toxic assets. They weren't necessarily over-leveraged. And there were some asset bubbles, so it wasn't trouble-free, but it certainly wasn't as fragile and serious as it was in the United States and to some extent in Europe. And it certainly was in England as well. I think this focus on compensation is somewhat misguided. I don't think that restricting compensation, I don't have anything particularly against some broad restrictions on compensation, because I don't think you need millions and millions of dollars to motivate people. On the other hand, I don't think restricting compensation is actually going to solve the regulatory problem. I think we need complete regulatory coverage, enhanced disclosure, so that people really have better information on the evolving structure of the financial system, so that they can assess it and take defensive action. The problem in this crisis was the players in the game and the regulators didn't see the risk rising. And I think we need increased capital and reserve and margin requirements so that institutions and investors have less chance to develop really excessive leverage. Telling people, the financial markets have a kind of trading superstructure that's gotten much bigger, in the last 20 years, in part because of information technology. You can set up a trading operation anywhere now, where you used to have to go to the floor of an exchange. And there's an element of casino in it, but it performs a function, which is kind of market making and price setting. But restricting compensation is a little bit like telling people they can play high-stakes poker without the high stakes. They'll probably still play high-stakes poker, because some people like doing that, but that doesn't solve the essence of the regulatory challenge that we face now.